Okay, so I wanted to get started asking about how the film really came into development and what really interested you, both in really telling the story and what that process was like of getting the film together.
Yeah, absolutely. So my thinking about Agnes really started in 2014 when I got a fellowship to work with my friend Kristen Schilt at the University of Chicago. And through a series of very fortunate events, we ended up gaining access to the archive that is featured in our film. And we found Agnes's case files and the case files of many other participants and subjects in 2017. And it was in reading those transcripts that all of a sudden my documentary film brain started sparking wildly, thinking about what might be possible with this new access to this material. And we shot a short version of the film in 2018, which premiered in 2019. And it was around that same time that we started shooting the feature. And here we are 3 years later.
And Jules, I also wanted to ask you about what really interested you in taking part in the film and your experience helping, like with the research in particular.
Yeah, well, Chase and I have known each other for a while, and we travel in many similar circles in academia. And I certainly knew about the story of Agnes, the central figure in this film. Probably, I mean, for at least a decade, I had been reading about her sort of off and on since graduate school. And, she was sort of one of these people stuck in the back burner in my mind, not someone I was directly doing a ton of research on, but who just kind of popped up from time to time in my life. And yeah, so when Chase approached me, actually during the pandemic, after the pandemic had started, and we were just sort of talking about the difficulty of telling trans stories like this and starting to get into the film, for me, it was like from the first moment we were speaking the same language, right? I mean, I was fired up, not just because I had a kind of similar knowledge base, but more because of this kind of ethos. And I think that gets to the other part of your question, right? This kind of need to tell better stories about trans people in the past, and this kind of feeling that, I think I like to think of myself as a professional historian as someone that kind of has the great privilege to walk around with all of these incredible people's stories, in my mind and in my heart. And Agnes having sort of been one of those people, but also the kind of other cast of characters that we get to know in the film who, I hadn't encountered before, all made sense to me as kinds of people I had been spending many years thinking about as well. So there's right away from this sort of get-go, a kind of like, oh, I'm with you, in terms of the problems and the questions that the film was interested in. But then for me, as a trans woman, as a trans woman of color, and a, sometimes public facing historian, the chance to come in as me and, and talk and not just be sort of an expert, but actually to come in as who I am with my own relationship to the stories was something that just drew me in right away to this project. And in that sense, I think I sort of share that with everyone else on screen, right? I'm not, I'm different than all the actors who are playing, roles, but I too have this kind of movement back and forth between me as myself and the sort of work that I'm there to do as part of the ensemble.
And also, speaking of the ensemble and the rest of the cast, I also wanted to ask about that experience of bringing everyone else on board who appears in the film as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just love listening to Jules speak because, there's this moment where I think people could easily say, Jules is the exception to the rule. Jules is the only person who arrives as herself. But I think to your point, Jules, and one of the things that I love is the sort of choices to frame you within the white wall gallery space of the documentary expert and to then incorporate your movement into the very fabric and frame and flora and fauna of UCLA, to me is such an important pivot that we collectively choose to engage and explore. And I think it's related to your question about all of our various incredible stars who traffic and traverse many different boundaries in the films. But the easiest way to answer your question is that in reading these case files, it was immediately apparent and exciting to me to Kristen, to anyone who encountered these historical traces, the resonances and connections to some of our friends and some of our colleagues and people who are living and working and thinking about transness in public. And that for me was a really key distinguishing feature in who we asked to approach. Is we already wanted a buy-in for those who understood the role of performance and the role of a kind of public narration in the fabric of their own life and their own profession. And then to think about that as it relates to those who are walking into CLA for very different reasons.
And also, I wanted to ask about really putting the script together and what that experience was like for you both to, like I asked you before, Jules, about the research, just in general for you both and that experience and taking that research and really putting it into the narrative of it.
Well, Jules, maybe we can do this as a handoff. I can set up the Morgan writing environment and then I can hand it to you.
Perfect.
So I feel extraordinarily lucky to have been collaborating with Morgan and Paige for many years across many projects. And Morgan's presence as a writer on this film is one that deserves a kind of explanation, because I think when people encounter the writer credit on a documentary, so often they're like, but what does that mean? How do you write a documentary? And of course, we're writing documentaries all the time, whether or not there's a credit on that film. And so Morgan and I spent careful time with the transcripts themselves and thinking about character and thinking about narrative arc and thinking about theme, but then also built out the script of the talk show itself. So spent many a week and many a month wrestling over what is the language that me as Chase Joynt, Mike Wallace, Harold Garfinkel uses to get a public that is in 2020 to believe a 1950, to also ride this line of transphobia and violent curiosity. How do we do that from a very trans motivated perspective? And that's really the work that Morgan and I did until arriving on stage, where of course we let go of that script in service of the kinds of conversations that were had with our actors on screen and off. And it's that work product that was in motion when Jules joined our team.
Yeah, I mean, I think one way to think about the film is almost like a built environment, right? So there was all this deep layer of research that went into the foundation, and then there was this script writing process that Chase and Morgan so brilliantly put together. And then there have been the layers, the production layers, and of course, the pandemic sort of pausing everyone's work had a sort of impact there in sort of slowing things down for a while, which was the point at which I came in. And so in some ways, I like to think that the script and what had been shot up to, say 2020 was sort of like this built environment into which I walked. And then, we did another round of shooting with me in LA, which, sort of pulls everything together. But in some ways, I still think the final product of the film feels kind of like that built environment where you're watching the different characters and actors and, creators, filmmakers, historians walking in, moving around, spending time with each other. And now the audience is being invited into that as well. So I think there's something really important about what was initiated in the script writing process and the kind of collaborative layered version of the film that's going to continue kind of growing over time. And we're sort of at a really exciting juncture now that people are coming in, the audience is coming, like this whole world of Framing Agnes is about to get really big and really populated.
And speaking about how audiences are about to see the film as well, and with the movie playing virtually during Sundance, what's that experience been like for you both and preparing for that and really helping to promote the film for Sundance as well?
Well, of course, we are sad to not be together in person in Park City, but we are a scrappy hustle of a team and have always acknowledged the ways that online worlds have benefited trans people, trans communities, translation of ideas to those who would never be in Park City and who might be structurally outside of the circuits of its first pass on the festival circuit. And I love that people can buy tickets for $20, that we can buy tickets for people for $20, and that our access has immediately opened because it is foundational to who we are as a team. And I think there's going to be great benefit from that momentum.
Me too. I mean, I think there's something so of this moment, for better and for worse, right? Of course, we're all sad not to be there in person, but I think in some ways, and maybe I want to argue that queer people, trans people, LGBT people have been really at the forefront of this kind of community viewing, community audiences, using social media, using the internet to watch things in real time together and to talk about them, to make ideas, basically to everyone, for everyone to become critics and to like really build a life out of sharing in cultural production and viewing. And I think it's really exciting, the way that Sundance has moved, virtually is allowing this film to kind of, have that resonance and reach that I think is so important to all of us, but that also the film really lends itself to. Like, this is a movie that you're going to want to watch more than once, and that you're going to want to watch with people, you're going to want to talk to people about, and you're going to want to travel with you in your life. And so in some ways, I think although it's strange for all of us to be in our little screen boxes all over the place, there's something kind of beautiful about that. There's something that really kind of winks and nods to some of the stakes of the film and what it means to talk about trans people as networked and in community. And now, again, to think of this whole audience as like a community that we're building, through viewership. So it's going to be exciting. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that unfolds.
Chase, I also wanted to ask you about directing the film and what that experience was like for you, and going from working on writing the documentary into directing as well.
Yeah, I cannot distinguish the boundaries between the titles or the work. And I will say that, I mean, it's the most extraordinary pleasure of my life to be directing this project, but I also feel like I'm co-directing the project. And I really feel strongly that as a team, we are deeply invested in a polyvocal approach to the film. And that means a sort of rigorous return time and time again to the team to keep thinking together about what are the questions that are driving our choices? What are the representational possibilities? But also to not flatten the responsibility of directing a project like this, really taking responsibility for my choices and making sure that as we make this turn toward a public, that I am ready to account for the choices that I've made and the literal positions that I have put people in through the choices of editing, through the choices of music, through the choices of picture, all of which are manipulations, all of which are strategic and organized around a certain kind of goal. And so it is a thrill, it is a joy, it is what I want to be doing in my life now and hopefully in the future.
And if I could say one thing, from my observation point and, in glowing tribute to Chase's directorial work, and I think this is something that, as his incredible, filmic repertoire is, only growing, that we're seeing as a little bit of the Chase Joynt signatures. He's able to bring people in, right, and do something different from in a traditional documentary. Me as, say, a historian, I would have just been brought in, plunk me down in a chair, ask me questions that I would answer as an expert, and it wouldn't pull me out of my normal day-to-day role whatsoever, right? The goal would sort of be to minimize how complicated it could be on screen, or really to incorporate me into the film at all. And I've certainly experienced that in other documentaries, and there's room for that. But here, what was so amazing was that I walked on set, nervous, certainly, because this was my first time doing anything like this, but Chase's directorial style in concert with the whole team was able to allow me both to be who I am, to do the sort of, historian thing, but to actually support me in a way that I could become a collaborator and become part of thinking through how the film itself was going to unfold. And that happened both the night before we shot, some of my scenes, also happened, during post-production and, watching different cuts, being in conversation with different editorial choices. And I really want to underline that because I think, it actually does take a great degree of skill. It's not just about sort of humility and spreading around, credit. It also takes a certain kind of know-how and a certain kind of sophistication. And it's a real sort of directorial technique, I think, to empower other people who are less well-versed to become, active, genuine collaborators in a project. And so I just think that's something that, since I am a lucky beneficiary of it in so many ways, I'm just like happy to underline and sing from the mountaintops a little.
And also speaking about the post-production and the editing for the film, I also wanted to ask about that experience and what it was like really deciding what to include in the final version of the film.
Hmm.
We finished post-production on the film in the height of the pandemic, in a lockdown. And so the circumstances of our finishing color and sound and online were unlike any other project. And as a result, it meant that I was alone a lot in rooms and working remotely with teams who were also alone. And of course, we know that a project being finished in 2021, we are in a cohort of films who have experienced post-production in this way. But it was strange and alienating, and one that required an additional level of trust in the technicians who were in the rooms, who were in the sound studios, to be a part of our team. And what I mean by that is not just, oh, we're on a film that we need to finish, but rather, what are the underwriting foundational commitments of this film, and how does the sound mix impact those gestures? How does the subtlest movement on someone's voice have just, in my opinion, catastrophic impact on our interpretation and experience of them if done incorrectly? How does color elevate and or detract from the kind of worlds we're trying to make and inhabit together on screen? It's not just fixing mistakes, right? Post-production is a kind of live elevation and escalation of choices that you made on the day. And so doing that in a pandemic was certainly stressful, but also very, very exciting.
And then also, what do you both hope that audiences can take away from the film and really learning about the history, and what's that experience like of really deciding how you want audiences to react to the film, maybe, or just take away from it overall?
I mean, I think like the film is so lush and alive that part of the excitement is we won't know for sure. There's so much to be taken away. And I think there's something there for every kind of audience, right? I think, history buffs might go in expecting one thing, trans people might go in expecting something, people from LA, or, people who've had experiences like this, but even people who have just sort of been watching trans people kind of, under the microscope in the national conversation for the past few years are going to come in with something else. And so that's part of what's so exciting. But I think ultimately, for me, at least, what's so important about this movie is that it doesn't take the easy way out on anything. And, I think either because, that's just sort of the tilt of American mainstream culture right now, or because of, the incredible duress under which trans people live in this country and have to find ways to produce culture and get things out in the world, there have been a lot of kind of concessions to either tragic stories or feel-good stories in the past few years. And in some ways, I think, even sort of general audiences are starting to kind of get that rhythm and pick up on it and be like, I think I've heard this one before, right? And that's so strange because in reality, we've told so few trans stories, especially historical ones, especially from time periods like this. So I really want people to, get ready, buckle up, because I think the film swoops in and it says like, hey, kindergarten's over. Like, we're really going somewhere complicated, but somewhere that we can handle, right? And I think that what's so interesting to me is we put so much pressure, right, when it comes to LGBT people, when it comes to trans people, when it comes to minorities in general, on, oh, the future has to be better because the past was so bad. And I think this movie comes in and says, not so fast. Are you so sure? Right. And the point is not that the past was good or bad. The point is that it was a lot more complicated than we give it credit for. And we walk around in this world to this day, inheriting that legacy. And so I think in some ways, I want people, I was going to say walking out of the theater. Okay, well, turning off their screen at the end of the screening to feel like, whoa, the world around me is a little supercharged and a little extra vivid because this history lives in it. Even if I can't see it, right? Even if I can't put my finger on it, even if I can't point to it, even if I myself am not personally implicated, or the people I love or the people I know aren't directly represented on screen, this world that I live in comes out of what I've just seen. And then the question becomes like, what do you do with that? What's your responsibility to that? What do you want to do about that? What do you feel about that, right? And I think those are all really important conversations that this film is going to spark, and that I think all of us who are a part of it are just so thrilled to be able to bring to people, because I think in some ways it's long overdue in so many ways, but I think I'll leave that, to people to discover and enjoy as they watch.
And I am so happy for Jules to have the final word on that.
Yeah, I think that was mainly it, but thank you both again for taking the time out today to speak with me. I appreciate it.
Oh,
Thanks so
such
much,
a
Karen. We appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thanks for your thoughtful questions.
You're welcome. Thanks again.
Have a great day.
You
Take
too.
care.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.